Human Resources Administration Committee together for a joint meeting. First item on the agenda is roll call. Pamela, would you please do that?
Sure. Naomi Cohen.
Here.
Richard Balducci.
Here.
David Jimenez.
Here.
Joanne Ryan. Here. Elise Gray Kemp.
Here.
And Elise Wright is absent today.
We have a quorum.
We have a quorum. Thank you very much. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the January 29th meeting.
So moved.
Is there a motion?
Second.
Thank you. A second, thank you. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
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 Minutes are adopted. Next is the information items that we have before us.
Oh, excuse me, Mr. Chairman. We also need to do the Human Resources and Administration meeting minutes for January the 23rd.
Those as important as mine.
They're not as important as the finance minutes, obviously, but on a motion from you, Mr. Chair, and I assume, David, you're the second
Take the motion.
Second.
for those minutes. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are adopted. Did you hit it, Mike?
The information items that we begin with. We have the CSCU 2027 annual report. Keith? Good morning, Keith.
We report to you semi-annually for our 2020 report, and this is the report as of the end of 2019. And in brief, the report you have is formatted 90 degrees from where it should, so it's a little hard for you to read. So I'll just do a brief overview. For our major program, our code compliance infrastructure improvement programs, we're starting to draw closure to the funds in that program. We originally were allocated $82 million. And between the four universities, now we're down to about $4 million. Most of those dollars will be spent between now and the end of summer. Of major projects for each institution, we have a little money, $1 million left for Willen and DiLoretto. There's a couple of things at Central that we're finishing, but that project is primarily completed, and at some point we'll move the money into our code compliance fund to complete other items on campus. We have a Burrett Library expansion. We're expecting to spend about $500,000 in design fees this year, and we'll start on a construction project next year of about $16 million. Kaiser Hall project, Kaiser Hall addition has been completed. It's the athletic facility that replaced the air and train bubble. That's complete. Students are fully utilizing that. There's a little work to still be completed on that. Barnard Hall will be completed. That's under renovation now. It should be completed for September. We'll spend about a few $1 million on that project for the remainder of the year. And then we'll spend about $40 million next year on the new engineering building that just broke ground. At Eastern, we finished the Goddard Hall project, which was renovations to their oldest classroom building. Just completed. There's about $500,000 worth of work to complete there, but that building has been occupied since September. At Southern, the Health and Human Services building that we just had the ribbon cutting, or rather groundbreaking ceremony on, and that will take about 1.5 years to complete. It's a wonderful new facility. We'll spend about $20 million on that facility over the next year in construction. In the School of Business, we anticipate bidding for construction this summer. That's our last 2020 project, the School of Business at Southern. And we have some other miscellaneous projects at Western, Higgins Hall that we completed, and we're finishing. It's occupied. We're finishing some minor construction items. And really the only major funding line item we have left is the alterations and improvements to our auxiliary service facilities, which are the student unions, the student use buildings. We have about $10 million left on that account in 2020, and we'll be spending that down over the next year. Other than that, we've yes.
Western, what we have a West Side Campus project?
Not in the 2020 program. We had Higgins Hall. Currently, we're doing some improvements to the student union, but that's chief of funded. but nothing on the west side right now. We're doing a small restroom facility. I don't know what you know, it's over there, about a $500,000 standalone building under the code compliance program, but that's it right now.
Thank you.
For the entire program, we have $1,023 million that have been made available over the past decade. We've committed $850 million. We've spent $760 million of those dollars and project about $130 million expenditure on our projects over the next year. And that's my report.
Thank you. Any comments or questions for Keith? If not, thank you very much for that, Keith. The next item is guided pathways. Ben?
Yeah, thank you. Hang on, let me make sure. Thank you. I placed this on the agenda because this board cycle, the Academic and Student Affairs Committee is considering a proposal to adopt a policy concerning holistic case management advising, which is the most, the central piece of the Guided Pathways program. That policy entails establishing a goal of a ratio of students to Guided Pathways advisors of 250 to 1, which is well below the current, the ratio that varies from campus to campus, but is 600 or 800 students per advisor, or in some cases, I think even higher. So this would be a significant advance toward implementation of Guided Pathways. Because an item is being discussed in another committee that has significant fiscal and operational impacts on the district, I thought it was helpful to provide at least a summary of what we know about the fiscal implications of the advisement component. I will, in my staff report, I point out that we will be submitting a spending plan to the board later this spring that will provide significantly more detail than we have available today. We're working through all the issues in the budget, including the spending for Guided Pathways or case management advising. But I did want to point out a few items that I think are important for the board to bear in mind as they consider the policy that's for the ASA committee. First of all, while we do know that the Guided Pathways program will entail new expenditures, we also believe that it produces significant new revenues. We have, using work produced by Dr. Johnstone from the National Center for Inquiry and Improvement, he developed a model for determining the return on investment for Guided Pathways. We have adapted that model to meet the circumstances here in Connecticut. And based on that, we believe that there is a return on investment approaching 1, that depending on which costs you build in, the revenue that we can reasonably anticipate from additional student credit attempts and increased persistence will be, at a system-wide implementation, will ultimately match or potentially exceed the costs of providing those advisement services. Now, there may be other costs such as additional faculty to cover more sections that would be required, and those may or may not be fully covered by the revenue from the Guided Pathways program, but certainly the direct costs of advisors, we believe, will be. They will not be covered immediately, however. Obviously, when you roll out a program like this, there are a lot of upfront costs related to the hiring and training of those advisors, development of a comprehensive training program for the cohorts of advisors we'll bring on, as well as providing technological supports, systems for tracking student progress, identifying students who are not on their path and require some intervention. All those systems we're working to develop good cost estimates for putting those systems in place over the next several years. However, we believe that the costs, our preliminary cost estimate for fiscal 21 for this first phase of implementation, which would consist of 3 colleges, with meeting the 250 to 1 ratio at 3 colleges, and then we would get to the other 9 over a 3-year period. We anticipate the first-year cost to be about $3 million. In rough terms, I expect that about $1 million of that is one-time costs, and we're still refining these estimates, one-time costs to establish a training program, for instance, that we would then be able to use for successive cohorts. But we do, so it will have a budgetary impact without offsetting revenue in the first year. We anticipate being able to accommodate that in our spending plan, along with all the other issues that are going on. But I didn't want to, I wanted to provide that information to this committee today so that the board can consider it as they consider the broader policy. We intend to provide significant detailed estimates of not only the budget implications for the year in which we're proposing a spending plan, but we will also try to provide a multi-year evaluation that looks at the costs, specific costs of rolling out the program over 3 years, and we'll take a fresh look at our revenue estimates that we prepared a year ago for the general program and see whether those need to be adjusted based on the specific rollout that we envision.
Thank you. Any questions? No, go ahead.
You know, Ben, that there's been much discussion about the number 250 to 1, since we're somewhere between 750 to 900
Yes.
students per advisor today. What gives you extreme confidence that we're going to reach it in a year?
That we're going to get to 250? Well, first of all, our current plan is to do it over 3 years.
Okay.
So that we would reach 250 at 3 campuses. That obviously gives us the ability to...
In a year, though.
Right. So we would be onboarding about 60 employees, give or take, supervisors and advisors, who would cover those schools. I do know that there is considerable experience in state government of onboarding employees in a cohort model. So the Guided Pathways Management, the academic affairs, is going to, and they are developing plans now to establish a training program to do sort of mass level recruitment, to bring in those employees and to go through a sort of a training cohort model so that they would all receive the same instruction and be prepared to take over. Now, it is inevitable that the first day that all of them show up for work, they will have no experience implementing Guided Pathways, and so we I think understand that the beneficial impacts of Guided Pathways program with respect to retention and persistence and success may not be, may take some time to achieve because of the individuals who are doing the work, learning how to do it effectively, and also because, you know, if you advise a student today, that will potentially improve their behavior, improve their outcomes in the future. You know, you can't measure persistence until they've, you know, one semester's ended and the next one's begun and they've come back. So we appreciate that the revenue benefits and some of the outcomes benefits will come in after. But we, I think, have confidence that we can hire and implement 60 new advisors at 3 campuses. We're currently beginning to look at the space needs and the practical implications of doing that at those specific campuses.
So if I could just maybe ask Greg DeSantis, who's leading this effort, to come up and also follow up on what Ben said. But from the financial perspective, too, I would also like to point out that while we have a commitment to make this happen with our internal budget, there also seems to be an interest both from the governor and from legislative leaders in providing funding to make sure we get to where we need to go. As I think we reported previously, the governor did include $2 million in his budget for what we're terming a down payment on the Guided Pathways Initiative. And other conversations we've had in the building have indicated that there is an interest in providing whatever funding we think is necessary to get us to our goal over the next couple of years. Greg?
Goal is probably the key word there. So based on feedback that we received initially, and we'll talk a little bit more about this at ASA on Friday, we modified the language to say that we have the goal of scaling to 250 to 1 by 2023 rather than the firm we will scale by 2023 to 250 to 1. So that if any variable comes into play that prevents us from doing that by 2023, it's still our goal if the policy is adopted, but it gives us some flexibility in that regard.
It's my hope that we will see such strong enrollment gains that we will have difficulty keeping up with the new advisors. But that has not yet happened. But that's certainly my goal.
Any other questions? The $3 million, Ben,
Yes.
and maybe you alluded to it, but I thought it was $2 million for the 60 advisors at one point. Am I?
Yes, that's correct. But we are also beginning to develop cost estimates for developing a sort of cohort-based training program. So we're likely to bring in experts. Greg can speak to this, but my understanding is that we would bring in outside experts who have established these programs in other systems and other colleges, and they would develop a curriculum that was tailored to meet our needs that we would then be able to use to train the first cohort and subsequent cohorts to get them on board. And that we think that those costs, I'm sure that we're going to probably find some facilities costs that we're going to need to absorb to make sure that people have appropriate locations for advising students at the scale that we're talking about. And I'm sure there are other incidentals that we're trying to make sure we understand and budget for.
And so we're kind of betting on the come that we're going to invest this money and get another $20 million or so back as we move forward through your optimistic comments.
Well, yes. I mean, there's no, the assumptions that we used in modeling the revenue are very conservative. So for instance, we assumed that a Guided Pathways advisor would be able to induce, through the tools that we provide them, induce the students that they advise, on average, to attempt one additional credit per semester. So that means 1 out of 3 students that they advise would take 1 extra class. That seems reasonable, like not out of the realm. We're not asking them to double every student's course load to achieve this. We've also built in the assumption that the Guided Pathways advisement would result in a 10% reduction in the number of students who do not return from one semester to the next, and that actually produces quite a bit of additional revenue. If we can get students on a path and support them through their academic and non-academic challenges, we think that they're much less likely to drop out from one semester to the next, and that ultimately, I think, provides the lion's share of the additional revenue that we would imagine to get, and the enrollment.
10% is a good number. Hopefully that holds true. Any other comments on this issue, Guided Pathways? If not, we'll move on to the next one, which is an update on Students First. Thank you, buddy. I've got,
All right, I'm going to kick this one off, and then I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues.
then Andy and Joe, right, are part of this?
Right.
Yes.
Ben's going to kick it off, and then we'll pick it up from there.
The Students First plan has a couple of supports our institutional resources. This is referring back to institutional resources under our NETCHI accreditation standards. We believe that the Students First plan supports those institutional resources in 2 ways. and I think it's important that I identify them both. As the one is the obvious answer that we will, through consolidation of some back office functions, administrative functions, we will reduce our costs by performing the work with fewer people in a more efficient, cost-effective way. So that, I think, is clearly part of the Students First plan. However, in addition, the Students First plan, by bringing some of these back office functions into a shared service consolidated model, we believe that we will be able to improve the quality of those services, to improve our compliance with various rules and requirements, whether it's federal rules, audit standards, et cetera. We think we can improve our level of compliance, and we can improve the quality of the work that we do. One of the issues that we have discovered in consolidating services is that in many cases, services are provided in 12 variations of one approach, and so that there is inconsistent results as a result of that. Some situations that doesn't really matter, but in other cases that I think diminishes the quality of the work that we perform, makes things less transparent and less effective. So we believe that the consolidation both addresses that, improving the quality of the work that we're performing in support of the academic mission, and also reduces its cost. I'm going to turn it over to Andy. He's going to talk about the human resources, and then Joe will talk about information technology.
So we're going to share, I think we're on. We're going to share the org charts, but before we get into that detail, I just wanted to spend a few minutes talking about what centers of excellence are and shared services, to build a little bit on what Ben has said. So it's a very well-proven model out there at different institutions as well as in the private sector. So let's talk a little bit about centers of excellence. So center of excellence are where we bring together skill sets under one roof. As Ben alluded to, 12 institutions, 12 different ways. Well, those individuals sit at those institutions wearing 4 or 5 hats: payroll in the morning, benefits in the afternoon, et cetera. This will allow us to consolidate those functions and expertise. So that is what people do, and they will become, if they are not already, are experts in that. And that will not only improve focus, because it's all that they do, but it's been proven that it improves quality and it improves speed, and I think, as Ben alluded to, also a compliance issue. So that's the reason that we've looked at these shared services, and the short answer for Center of Excellence or shared services: faster, better, and generally cheaper. So within the HR function, on attachment A, we've got our 5 centers of excellence in affirmative action, talent and recruiting, labor relations, comp and benefits administration, and in our strategic HR support. So to give you some insight into how that will work, I think I'll use the labor relations function as an example. Through that function, we'll be able to consistently manage and implement all of the collective agreements consistent across all of the locations. We've got quite a number of unions, and we have single agreements that cover multiple campuses. So this function will ensure that how we interpret and apply that contract remains consistent, whether it be a university contract or a community college. That will help us avoid conflicts from campus to campus and inconsistent decisions. We also will have some investigators in that function. One of our biggest challenges that we run into is the time it takes to do an investigation. By having a center of excellence, these folks, this is all they will do. The biggest concern for a complainant and a subject in an investigation is the time it takes to get to an answer. This model has been proven to show that it improves the speed with which we're able to execute investigations, come to a conclusion. It will still leave the decision-making on the outcomes with the individual institutions and their leadership. But this investigator will come with a high-quality, well-done, speedy investigation. and then the recommendations for decisions through the management chain at the individual institution. So that's an example of how the functions, and that will get repeated across the different functional areas, and some insight into what shared services does in terms of speed and quality, and has been alluded to, the compliance aspects. Any questions?
I'm just looking at the chart and the,
Talk to us a little bit, Andy, about the ramp up to do this, associated costs that may or may not be eliminated further down as we move to one college?
I think in terms, and I can speak to the costs on the human resources function in particular, we're looking at probably being about net flat in terms of absolute headcount. We expect to fill most of the positions with our existing talent. There will be some promotional opportunities for our folks. The implementation phase will be facing that challenge of building the new structure while trying to maintain the old structure. So we may have some limited, what we call double bubble carry. One of the biggest challenges will be evolving the culture and how folks consume these HR services over the first year. That will probably take some additional effort and headcount. As we get these matured and up and running and building the automated systems, eliminating paper, doing things electronically, we expect we'll go back to flat, and we may be able to even address some headcount issues a year to two out in the longer term.
Hey, it's David Amenez, if I can ask a question.
go David.
Sure, David.
I fully support a Center of Excellence model and have been through that kind of a change in an organization and led that kind of a change, so I fully support it. But it is change, and change needs to be managed. And so just wondering if, Andy, if you could comment on the change management efforts that you anticipate, and secondly, is there sufficient uniformity across the system so that your centers of excellence can operate in accordance with one set of policies and protocols and expectations, or do you anticipate having to develop uniform policies in relation to some topics?
So let me answer, I'll answer the second part first. So there is, as we've alluded to in a number of conversations, 12 different ways being done by all the campuses. We can consolidate them, as I alluded to. We've got the same collective bargaining agreements across the number of campuses. So from a labor relations perspective, we consolidate. As we move to the one college, we'll be looking to more broadly consolidate policies as well. So we're looking at the existing processes and policies. We're looking, do we already have good and solid practices in place? And we'll look to adopt those and then roll them out across the system. But David, to answer your question directly, yeah, we will have some places where we will need to design and implement new policies. A lot of the system still remains pretty paper intensive, and we've got to move away from that to make the centers successful. I don't see a huge obstacle to moving and consolidating to one set of policies and practices across the 12 sites. So go back to the first part of your question on the culture shift.
But before you tackle that, Andy, just one comment, and I know you know this from your prior life, but if there's 12 different ways of doing things, let's say of interpreting, for example, the PTO policy, or interpreting a snow day issue, or whatever HR policy, if there are 12 different ways, it's important that the centers of excellence have access and information at their fingertips as to those 12 different ways, because otherwise they lose credibility when they're asked the question and they're not aware of the specific interpretation of that organization. Do you agree with me on that, or is that not an issue that will happen with frequency?
I think initially, David, you're right. There are, as we said, there are 12 different ways of doing things out there. But our path will move them, and we believe it's possible in the overwhelming majority of instances, to a single policy or practice. So initially, as we're transitioning people away from the policy variation to a single variation, it's going to require a lot of communication to folks. We don't think there's substantial differences out there, but enough in terms of process and how do we, to your point, get a consistent answer that comes from the center is critical to their credibility. So the first 3 to 6 months are going to be challenging as we consolidate those practices and are dealing with the individual practices. But within the first 8 to 12 months, we should be well on our way to a single set of policies and practices for most human resources related policies and practices. And as I said, for the most part, in the community college environment, sure, the collective agreements are pretty consistent campus to campus with some limited violation given they are negotiated across campuses. That answer your question, David?
Yes, it does. And I cut you off on the change management issue.
So I don't think the change management part can be underestimated, given the long history of these institutions operating individually and being able to knock on the door and get answers to your questions. So we're working through with those teams, and I think you've heard this analogy with Students First. We're flying one plane while we're building the other one. If you look over to the far right in the org chart, the director of the college HR strategy there, that's the function that will be on campus and driving through the culture change along with the campus CEOs and presidents and the regional presidents as we transition. So we will maintain and have a face of HR on the campuses to help direct and redirect folks as we implement, say, for example, I need to change my beneficiary. Today, you can walk into a campus HR office and you fill out a form. That will evolve to send an email. We'll do it all electronically. But we'll have that function probably in the first 6 to 8 months functioning as a traffic director for us as we shift people to the evolution of the service delivery. It is a big change for the community in that they're very accustomed to hands-on, face-to-face service. But by the end of the year, we will have moved to very much an electronic communication, email, phone calls, and an electronic document exchange, which will make us more efficient. But it is a big shift from the perspective of the employee that we're going to need to certainly very early on do some hand-holding. And to your point, David, you have to demonstrate success to the individuals and help them understand that in the long run, it is faster and better and higher quality for them.
Terrific. Thank you.
And you had a comment?
Oh, I think I wanted to, returning to Naomi's question, I think it's important to also be mindful that we have been experiencing significant attrition between 2017 and today. And so when I think Andy says we're looking to be about flat on, headcount and cost between today and the new structure, that does not count the fact that we may be down, 5 or 10%, simply because we have not been filling those positions. We've been, assigning, multiple duties to individual employees, which previously have been done by multiple employees and the like. So we're working to quantify that for our by specific activity area, but that is, at least across all these areas, has been a significant factor and should be considered as well.
Yeah, and it's given us that flexibility to really have room for our existing HR population to come sit in a seat in the shared services model. So any more questions on the HR?
Just quick one. there are 36 individuals involved here. And just as we move from 12 colleges down to 1, you anticipate any growth or diminishing numbers of these people that will be working within your department?
If Ben's predictions come true, we'll probably stay flat. We may need, because we would experience some increase. But I would say what I'm predicting right now is we'll remain flat. Once we get the automated systems up and running, we may see some ability to reduce some of the headcount, maybe particularly in those doing the bulk data management, which is heavily manual now. So the faster we automate that, that's an area where you may see an opportunity to bring down some of the headcount.
Thank you. Any other comments? Joe?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So from an IT perspective, on the community college side, I think what you'll see from the model we inherited was based on a 1990 structure, when many of the functions over the last 20 to 25 years had moved to at an enterprise level and being managed from Hartford. So the change to align the organizational structure under Students First with the technology structure was long overdue, and that cost model from the 1990s, as Ben and Melantina will tell you, was costing the system a great deal of money and not aligning properly with how the technology was being delivered. So in January, the President moved all of the community college IT staff under my office, the CIO, at the system level. During that time period, we have met with the collective bargaining units and the staff, and we've begun a skills assessment. So we're inventorying the skills of the IT staff at the campuses. And the initial org chart you see in the packet shows a regional coordinator and the staff moving under IT. So that is we have not hired the regional coordinators yet. We'll do that later in this fiscal year. They will probably, or more than likely, come from the existing staff at the campuses. But that is the only change we have made to date as we analyze the skills of the staff we have in place. We are planning to align those skills at the regional basis to the enterprise or shared services model. So from Hartford, we manage the entire network at 13 locations. The 4 regional universities have the same network, but they manage them locally. So they're all based on a standard that was written from a subcommittee out of Hartford. We do the same for wireless. The online learning system is all the same. The help desk process is all the same. The student information, the financial information system, financial aid, those systems are standard throughout the entire 17, with the exception of Charter Oak, 17 colleges. For the community colleges, those systems are run out of this building completely. So the final structure will, as I said, align the skills to functional shared services that will be run out of Hartford. So we're in the process of analyzing that data. We know the workflows associated with how to manage the network, how to manage the Wi-Fi. We know all those workflows that we will align the staff to that structure. What we've done differently in this shared services model is we are taking a component of the staff at each campus and assigning them to the academic mission, if you will. So there'll be a component of IT technologists that work for the academic dean on campus, and they will work exclusively with the faculty. If they see an enterprise or a shared service issue, they will coordinate that issue through the help desk and the regional coordinators. So we're trying to close that loop on some of the faculty issues that we heard when we did our analysis. Whoops, my computer's getting tired. So in general, you know, the staff have been extremely cooperative on the campus. They see this as the future. We haven't had any real issues. I take probably 3 calls a month from systems around the country on how are you doing this, how difficult is it, what are your obstacles, let us know when you're done, tell us how you got there, because it is a difficult task to turn this over a period of time. So when Ben and Andy talk about attrition. So in IT, in the system office, we're down about 20 staff. We anticipate we'll lose probably another 10 in the next 24 months. And that savings, based on Students First and some of the cloud strategies we have, will go to keep the staff level hopefully flat. So that's all I have to report.
Thank you. That's a big number, just all that kind of, thank you. Thanks. Any questions for Joe? Thank you for that.
Thank you.
So I'm going to cover the end here with the Finance Shared Service Organization, which is Appendix C. We are the finance division at the system office. These are not individuals on this particular org chart because in order to fit it on one page, some of these are areas that have multiple individuals. We are currently organizing shared services for accounting, for purchasing, and for payroll, and for facilities for July 1st. We have some additional areas where we will add additional services on thereafter within those areas in particular. So we will, in accounting, for instance, we are intending to initially on July 1st to have the current services that we provide plus the fixed assets accounting, which is currently done at the campus level. Well, sort of shared between, but we are going to take the full range of fixed asset accounting into the shared service organization. But we also envision down the road, over the next 24 months or so, also adding in accounts receivable, grants management, and there are a couple of less smaller areas where we may seek to. None of it is particularly. These are not the most high-profile areas. Well, there's some things, for instance, actually one of them that actually is relatively high-profile that we would like to centralize, but we are not planning to do that for July 1, is travel and travel planning and approval of travel and reimbursement for travel. Although the reimbursement piece is part of the payroll shared service organization. So in addition to accounting, we're doing purchasing, which is relatively far along and entails a very new division of labor between the campuses and the system office, so that the campuses will simply be responsible for identifying their needs, communicating that to the system office, and that the shared service organization will procure, will put out bids, will identify vendors, will maintain vendor files, will pay bills, et cetera. So the campus simply identifies their needs and then identifies that the goods and services have been received, and of course, make sure that the special requirements of the campus are being satisfied. We're definitely pursuing a customer service model there, where the purchasing organization will be meeting the needs of the campus through, by providing them low cost, high quality goods and services at their request. And then payroll is also an all new shared service organization. We currently have no involvement in payroll at the system office other than our own employees. So we are currently in the middle. Thank you to Andy Kripp and his staff for working with the existing organization to implement employee self-service. So we are on track for all campuses to be maybe not 100%, but 100% of normal full-time employees. There are a couple of special categories of employees which may be on a little slightly different time schedule, but all the normal full-time employees, the administrators and faculty are going to be on self-service this spring. Most of them are on self-service now. It works great. It's a reliable, robust system that has been in place for a long time. It's maintained not by us, but by the State of Connecticut Office of the State Comptroller. So that is proceeding along. We are then going to implement a shared service organization with probably about between 9 and 12 staff members that will process all the payroll, do all the reconciliations, manage all the sort of one-off issues that help come up, wage garnishments and verifications and all the different features, activities that go into payroll. That will be managed here. One area that I will point out that we are not converting to a shared service organization is budget. The budget function is going to remain in the sort of tied to the hierarchy of the college, so that Melantina and her budget shop for the system is going to remain in place. They are going to certainly be responsible for ensuring that spending plan and budget information is available both for the public, but also for approval by this board. We need to compile, for instance, budget requests from the universities and from the college and from Charter Oak, make sure that they are appropriate and that they are meeting the policies of the board and that they are communicated in a fair way to reflect the desires of President Ojakian and of the Board of Regents. She will continue to have that role and lots of other things that we do system-wide for budgeting. However, the regional structure includes the regional chief financial officer, I think is the name of the position. So there will be a regional person with significant responsibility for budget development within the colleges in that region. There will remain on campus, obviously, the CEO of the campus as well as Associate Dean of Campus Operations. They, working with the finance staff at the regional level and at the system level, will advance the budget development and budget administration over the course of the year. So that is not being a shared service. That is for a couple of reasons. One, during the transition, it is important that the budget development process remain at the campus level. That is a key control of resources is a key feature of the Standard 7 of the NETCHI accreditation standards. And so we want to make sure that we maintain that. Obviously, in a system context, the system can tell the colleges how much they've got and can tell them a whole lot of things about how they ought to spend their money. There are lots of constraints that all of us face in making budget decisions. But within those constraints and within those available resources, the accreditation standards require that the accredited institution have budget authority, and the system that we are undertaking maintains that through a transition and will maintain that with a single college. And I think will also give us the ability to realize regional efficiencies, to identify valuable and successful approaches in various institutions and implement them in other institutions around the system and to think creatively about meeting the individual needs of each campus. So the budget division and the budget effort will remain outside of the shared service model as it currently stands. So I'm happy to take any questions about that. We have the more detailed organization charts we are working on now. We've already begun hiring a few of the first folks for the payroll and purchasing organizations. We're backfilling some key vacancies in the accounting area now. So we're still working through that. We're also now, and this speaks to Regent Jimenez's question about change management. We are now, I think, quarter of the way done. We've met with 3 campuses so far, and we'll go through all 12, at which we identify exactly how each campus is currently providing every aspect of those specific services, identify how they staff those functions at the campus level, and we're using that information to refine our plan going forward, and that will inform the sort of organizational changes that must happen in each campus in order to implement these shared services.
What's the vision for where the actual people, units, departments, whatever you're going to call them, are going to be physically located?
With human resources, we're fairly location agnostic, except as I alluded to on that strategic HR function. Those folks, we want them to be on campus. We want them to be the face of HR. They want them to be the direct partners to the CEOs, regional presidents, and ultimately the college president. So those folks will be very location specific. With technology today, and where I'm confident we'll fill probably over 85% of these positions with existing folks, we're essentially location agnostic. It's helpful to have some of the leads here in the system office, but not required. So I think that's an advantage to have the ability to do a distributed model. Initially, in the first year, we'll probably be spending a fair amount of time here in the building and the construction and the transition process. But ultimately, what campus they sit on in today's environment of technology and WebEx and email and scanned documents and electronic signatures, it's a little easier to live in a distributed model.
Thank you. Any other questions? Jody, you wanted to?
Sure. So we hope to have a staff level in Hartford of about 30 to 35 people, and the rest of the staff would be at the campuses, Tech 1s and 2s, performing the services I described before. Yeah.
The new shared services in finance are expected to be here. I'm not sure exactly where here. We're working on that as we speak. There are, I mean, well, you know, this is my experience with organizations is that the staff expands to fill the available space. And we may have to restack some things here in order to make this happen. At least initially, and probably for the foreseeable future, I would like to have, because we're establishing some all new shared services, we think it's helpful to have people working together in a group environment, you know, especially payroll, for instance. We're going to be having, you know, people processing payroll alongside one another with specialization. And so I think it's important that those folks be located at the same place. That's a decision we could revisit in the future, but that's our plan for the time being.
Thank you. It just makes sense, though, for IT and HR to have hands-on, so to speak, at each campus. You can have it centered here, but the everyday goings-on at each campus, unless you're there, you don't know what's occurring. So I think that's critical between, you know, faculty, staff, students, and so on. So that's a great idea. Well done.
Big deal. And you've done a great job of thinking about this and presenting this. I think, well, aside from the culture change challenges that you've brought up, I think the messaging of how we communicate this both to Nietzsche and to our folks here is really important.
Thank you. Great job. Thanks. Any other comments by any members of the committees? If not, we'll move on to the action item. Which is the property conveyance between Gateway, North Haven campus, and the Area Cooperative Educational Services, ACES. Keith?
Yeah, sure. In 1985, the state bought Orchard Hill Middle School from the town of North Haven for the home of Greater New Haven Technical College. In 1992, the college system, community college system, and the technical college system merged, which created Gateway Community College out of both the New Haven Technical College and South Central Community College. Since then, as of 2012, we constructed a new facility in downtown New Haven, Church Street, for Gateway Community College, and the Gateway sites for both North Haven and Long Wharf both relocated to downtown Church Street, with the exception of the automotive facility, which was anticipated to move by 2015 once we obtained bond funds. So bond funds have not been obtained to date. So for the automotive facility remains for the past 35 years they've been there, and they remain at North Haven. And the goal, of course, was to relocate them to a real modern high-tech facility conducive to current automotive needs. North Haven is about 170,000 square feet, and the automotive facility takes up about 65,000 of those square feet. We've rented or leased North Haven 100,000 plus or minus square feet to the town of New Haven for a couple of their high school magnet schools over the past few years. Currently, we're leasing the space to ACES for their Wintergreen Interdistrict
Ryan has left the meeting.
Interdistrict K through 8 magnet school. So I won't go into ACES. You're familiar with who they are, and I talked about it last year when you authorized us to enter into a lease. So ACES and CSU has had a number of discussions about transferring the ownership of property from the BOR to ACES. And for us, this would be a cost savings effort. Right now, the annual operating budget, total operating expense for the North Haven campus is about $900,000 a year. We charge ACES $350,000 a year, year one. The lease could increase to, as energy expenses may increase. They were given a good deal, I call it, or I won't call it a good deal. I don't think it's a good deal. They were given a competitive rate for the space, which seems, even though they have 2/3 of the area, the space they occupy is in extremely poor condition, end of life, not code compliant. It needs a lot of improvements by ACES to occupy the space over the next few years. They have a 5-year lease agreement with the ability to extend it to another 5 years. So there are significant improvements, significant dollars they need to spend to stay in the space and occupy it. So what we would like to do is change ownership of the building. This would require legislative approval, and that's what we're asking you for at this point, the ability to approach legislation to authorize this change of ownership. In return, our advantage would be decreasing our operating expenses significantly.
Right.
And we would enter into an agreement, and we'll bring this to you in the future if before the property can be changed. We would bring a lease agreement to you, which would be probably an indefinite lease until we receive bond funds to move, and just again a very low rental rate for us for the future. Not Gateway. ACES's advantage is they can receive state grant bond funds and reimbursement rates from the State Department of Education. Their reimbursement rate is about 60% on every dollar they spend for applicable construction items. So by changing ownership, they can now ask for grant fund reimbursements, which again would be substantial to them. And of course, it gives them a home, which is secondary for us, because that's not our need, but it would give them a future home. But again, we're asking for your approval to allow us to address legislation to have property ownership changed for the building. And this is contingent on coming back to you with a lease agreement for Gateway, their automotive department, and ACES for the long term.
Thank you. Any comments on the proposal or the resolution?
Could I just add one comment? And that
Please.
is that the item before you is a resolution of essentially of support and for us to seek legislation to convey this property.
Right.
So the reason that we're doing that now, even though the session is sort of in midstream, we agreed with ACES that we would be willing to support a conveyance. Well, we would ask the Board of Regents to consider supporting a conveyance in the current session if ACES is able to garner legislative support for that. The benefit to them of getting a conveyance enacted this session, if possible, is that it would give them a 1-year leg up on getting school construction funds. This would allow them potentially to get onto the school construction priority list that would be funded so their project could be considered for approval next legislative session. We thought that would, we didn't see any reason why we couldn't support that as long as they're willing to continue to host our program as long as necessary, which doesn't seem to be an issue.
Thank you. Any other comments? Would entertain a motion for adoption of the resolution.
So moved.
Thank you. Felice, would you second that?
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Second.
Further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Opposed, nay? Resolution's adopted. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great job, by the way. Nice job, Andy. Ben, as always, good job.
David Jimenez.
Has left the meeting.
Felice.
Has left the meeting.
Highlighted where you're gonna be, and again, everything might change.
No, we don't want that order. We want you to ask.
Again?
Yeah, so once this legislation is signed off, it's in this.
4:30 and 6, I missed that highlight, let me highlight it.
Yeah, they're gonna vote.
Yeah. I'll send you another-
Highlighted right here, it's gonna jump out.
Did you say they had $40 million in for engineering?
Engineering this year. That'll be open in a year and a half. It's a nice facility.
Yeah, and that western stuff is good.
Yeah. So we're at the end of the line, I've discussed it with Ben about extending the program another 10 years. It's just hard for us.
That's what happened.
Who's hard Oh, yeah, we're at our limits. You want?
I gave
Okay,
you
thanks.
Naomi's, not yours.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Keith.
I apologize. Here, that's you.
You know, Fitzgerald, all you do is get me in trouble.
I know, but give